can't believe I'm doing this again. This is actually the third time I'm recording this. So the first time I recorded it, I usually, when I find an article, I just go through it with you guys so I see it, everything for the first time. And there was a topic in there that I didn't really address very well. But then I stumbled over it and then I moved on. And I thought, you know what? I shouldn't have done that. So then I tried to do it the second time knowing the contents. Then I stumbled over it again. So I thought, you know what? I am going to give this article the time of day that it needs. The time of day that it needs doesn't make sense. You know what I mean. Because this is actually not such a bad article. And I'm used to finding articles that are just ridiculous. So reacting to an article that's actually not so bad threw me for a bit of a loop. So we are back here again. And before I even get into the other parts of this article, I want to get into the part that I stumbled over because it's a big topic, okay? So this article is found on a website called Dabble, and Dabble has their sort of program for writers, and this article is titled Tips and Tricks for Writing a Fantasy Novel by Doug Landsborough, April 20, 2023. And so he goes through some tips and tricks for writing, and there's this one part, where is it? Let's see where it is. Where was it? Okay. So in the part where he talks about creating the setting, there's this section called Developing Culture. And in there is this subsection that says right here, don't be harmful. And so I'm just going to read this. This is still part introduction, okay? I'm just going to read this and go over this bit. I did look around. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just gonna read this. There's nothing wrong with basing your fantasy cultures off real-world civilizations or cultures, as long as you do it properly. Don't take harmful stereotypes like, quote, savage tribes or, quote, mystical people of the East and think that's good enough. It's lazy writing and reinforces stereotypes that have done actual harm. So I thought, okay, so what is this article? It says reinforcing stereotypes is a clickable link. So I went there. And it's specifically about, this is the title that it links to, how to write about character skin color in your novel. Specifically about BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and People of Color characters. So that is what this article is specifically about. It's specifically about skin color in your novel. That is not something I can really talk about. I will leave a link to this article in the description so you can look at it yourself. So it doesn't really talk about cultures, other people. And I did do a little bit of research on what are the things that are being said about harmful stereotypes in fiction, cultural appropriation, racism in fiction, disability in fiction, that sort of thing, just sort of to get a sense on what the top discussions are, what people are saying. And one thing I did find, it was just in passing, I didn't actually click on the article, was as long as you don't romanticize these harmful things, then it's okay, was one of the things that I saw. So, I feel like, it's a really difficult topic because as someone who lives in Japan and is half Japanese, I do sometimes see Japanese culture. I wouldn't say it's being appropriated. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it's misrepresented in fiction sometimes, or people just think that they can make up a Japanese sounding surname, but it's actually not a real surname. And surnames actually in Japan, the kanji characters, they mean certain things when put together. So you can't just make up some name like maybe you can with English. I don't really know actually that kind of stuff. But so when I see people haven't seemingly done their research, I get a little bit annoyed. As like, oh, so they're doing that. Okay. Or people thinking that people in Japan always wear slippers around the house, or they don't talk in the train, or whatever. It's just whatever you see in anime must be correct, or things like that, without taking into consideration that there might be like other types of schools, other types of homes, and maybe you need to think about the modern lifestyle and the traditional lifestyle and all kinds of things. So basically you need to do your research. And a thing about in fiction, it's like I feel like it's difficult because on one hand I think, okay, yeah, you guys need to do your research. But on the other hand, I think, well, if it's fantasy, then does that make it okay? But if you're using it in a harmful way, like if you're saying, like degrading somebody who is Japanese, being racist towards them in the fictional world and depicting as that being okay, then that would be harmful. But if you depict that as like they are being degraded and discriminated against, and some other character comes in and says that person is being racist, or there's a problem with what they are doing, or this person actually stands up and says, hey, that hurt my feelings, then although you do have some scenes of discrimination in the story, that it's not harmful because you're not showing it as being romanticized. I feel like that is okay. But some people might disagree. Some people might think don't put it in at all. But then you see, I've seen these discussions of people wanting diversity in their fiction, like they want to see people of more racial diversity, people with mental health issues, people with disabilities represented in fiction. And one article I found, some articles that I found, we're talking about, like, even if you don't have somebody as a specific character in the story that has a mental health issue, maybe the main character knows somebody with a mental health issue, and that is enough, apparently. What do you guys think? I feel like this is very difficult. So you can't really, like, this article just says don't be harmful, but it's not that, I wouldn't say clear cut isn't the word. It's not that you can't just summarize this discussion as just in 3 words, don't be harmful. And then the article that you link to is about Black characters. If you're going to talk about this on your website, I feel like there needs to be some more extended discussion because I've seen them around. And if you're going to have this here, and this article was written last year, so it's quite recent, write something this year and have a discussion, you know. There's all kinds of, I know there was something with appropriation where some artist, Netta was her name. Where is she from? Iranian? Israel? Iran? I can't remember. And she was wearing some clothes that looked like kimono, and she mentioned Pikachu in her song, and some people who aren't Japanese were saying that's cultural appropriation. But from my perspective, I was like, oh, she just likes Japanese stuff, because people in the States, people outside Japan like Japanese stuff all over the place. I mean, sometimes I'm surprised how much Japanese animation that people outside of Japan know. It's kind of funny. But I thought, oh, that's nice. She likes Japanese stuff. I didn't feel like it was cultural appropriation. There was also this thing where some beauty model, what was it? Miss something, beauty contest person, decided to wear a dress that looked like it had been taken from a kimono. And I remember there being sort of people, even in Japan, being interviewed, having different ideas. Like, some people thought, oh, she shouldn't be wearing it like that. And some people thought, oh, that looks very beautiful. She took something from Japan and made it her own. That's very nice. And some people were like, she shouldn't have done that. That's very inappropriate. And then a lot of people who aren't Japanese saying that's cultural appropriation. So I feel like it's kind of a difficult, is it subjective? Does it depend on the generation of what you think? I don't know. In terms of at least mental health issues, I don't think that's some generational thing. I mean, when I say cultural appropriation, I'm talking about like cultures. In terms of like being harmful about mental health representations, that's something I'm actually working on in a story. I have a character he is a psychopath, but him being a psychopath has nothing to do with his actions. It affects him in other ways, and I did a lot of research on psychopathy and watched interviews of people who are psychopaths and how they go about their life, how they perceive, how they view the world, and how their minds work. It's very fascinating. Trying to really show that, and this character being the way he is, has nothing, doing the things that he does, being the villain that is, has nothing to do with his being a psychopath. So really trying to show that, but I'm not a psychopath. So would it be considered harmful for me to actually be writing this character? Like, I don't really know what to think about that, because I am doing a lot of research. Is it okay because I'm doing research and I'm trying hard not to depict like you see in movies and books? It's like the evil person is a psychopath, that people say that, or they are a sociopath or something. But just because someone is a psychopath or a sociopath doesn't make them evil, right? So, so I just wanted to address that in the beginning here, because this does come up, and it was something that I hadn't realized that would be in here, and I thought it needed its own little bit in the beginning, just mentioning, just talking about this a little bit. So now we're actually going to get into the article. Now, if you have anything things to add of what I've just said, and you have some opinions and stuff, comment down below, but do so respectfully, and don't be mean to each other. Be nice in the comments down below. So yeah, anyway, so now we've gotten that out of the way, let's get into this article. So this was actually a pretty good article. I think I initially gave it a 3 or something. So, hi, let's get into this. All right. There are few genres as exciting to read or write as fantasy, whether you're craving a world more detailed than our own in a high fantasy story, obsessed with writing an urban fantasy about a bartender who makes drinks for fae and orcs, or love to indulge in a shifter fantasy romance. There's just something that sets fantasy apart from the rest of literature. So if you're absolutely in love with the fantasy genre, I get you. But writing fantasy isn't easy. In fact, I'd argue that writing fantasy is more difficult than any other genre. There isn't any other genre, save for maybe science fiction, where the world building, conflict, and creativity needed are anywhere near as intense. The payoff, of course, is that you get to write fantasy stories. If you're about to embark on your own epic fantasy writing adventure, or if you find yourself stuck in the dark dungeon of writer's block, I've got some incredible writing advice coming your way. And then he lists up the stuff that he's going to talk about, and let's get started. So, he says writing fantasy isn't easy. I'd argue that writing fantasy is more difficult than any other genre, save for maybe science fiction. I would say, I mean, is it difficult or is it complex? Because something being complex doesn't necessarily mean it's difficult, right? Also, I think like historical fiction, mystery are also pretty difficult. Or maybe it's just because I haven't done a lot of them. I don't know. I just find that saying it's more difficult than any other genre, say for maybe science fiction, is a little, I mean, maybe, but maybe not. And he's got some incredible advice. Let's see if it's actually incredible. Big words, big words. Big words, big claims. Lots of stuff, things. Okay. I just put a blanket on my lap. My legs are cold. Essential elements of fantasy writing. So he's going to be leaving these quotes. I'm not going to read the quotes. There's no point in reading them. Really isn't. As we covered, fantasy is different from any other genre. There are some key pieces of any fantasy story that authors need a firm grasp of in order to transport their readers to a different world. These essential elements aren't things you can tick off a checklist. They will be skills you'll only be able to develop through practice. That means reading and writing regularly. What are these essential elements, though? I'm so glad you asked. So one thing I thought was very good when I went through this the first and second time with this article is that he does say that these are going to be skills that you'll only be able to develop through practice. That's a good thing to say, because some writing articles don't say that these are skills like they tell you. You know these things, don't you? Why aren't you doing them? Kind of feel to the article, you know. At least he's acknowledging that you're not going to know these things from the start, that you're going to have to develop them over time. That's a good thing to say. So yeah, these are long, so I'm gonna try to, I wouldn't say breeze through them, but yeah. This says reading and writing regularly. You know, I have this thing about writing every day is a very, very common piece of writing advice. And although it's good to write every day because you're exercising that writing muscle, that creative muscle, you shouldn't have to beat yourself up about it when you don't write one day or when you don't feel like reading. It's fine to not do it every day. But saying writing regularly, does regularly, I'm having so much trouble with that word, does regularly imply every day or not? That is the question. I don't actually know. By the way, fun fact or funny story, this picture that he uses, I see them using it in other articles. So, I guess it's a free picture or something. I don't know. It doesn't look AI? I wonder where this is. Imagination. All writing takes some creativity and imagination, but writing fantasy takes it to a whole new level. It is your secret weapon, the key ingredient to everything you write. Without our creativity, our plot, world, and characters would be flat and lifeless. Here are some tips. Okay, here we get into it. Read a lot. You will see this in every article providing advice to writers. No, not every article. Many articles. Be careful when you use words like every, always, definitely, essential, because it might not be. So, keep in mind with that. Keep in mind about that, Doug Landsborough. Read bestsellers in your genre. Read your favorite authors. Read whatever feels fun. Every time you read, you're absorbing information about what works and what doesn't, and you're banking little details to fuel your own imagination later. That is true. When I do read, I am reading as, just having fun as a reader. I enjoy reading books. But sometimes I see something and I'm like, that's interesting. And it goes into my little part of my brain that's for writing. I think, interesting. So yeah, reading a lot does help you be creative, I guess. Write a lot. Many first-time authors believe your imagination is tied to a muse or outrage God. Experienced and successful authors recognize your creativity is like a muscle. See, this is where I got that like a muscle because he used it. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets and the easier it is to use. Make a habit of writing, preferably every day. Your imagination will become much stronger. It is true that if you do write every day, it's a muscle, so you do become used to being creative every day. Preferably every day is a good thing to say. A lot of writing, blah, 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 blah. A lot of writing advice articles tell you to write every day. Definitely. It has to be. Otherwise, you're not a writer. That's what they say. But saying preferably every day is a good thing to say because that means it doesn't have to be every day. So I guess when he says regularly, he doesn't mean every day. That's my interpretation. So yeah, it's good that he says this. Also, I like that he says it's like a muscle. That implies that it's not something that either you have it or you don't kind of thing. Either you're creative or you're not. It is a muscle. So when he says that these are skills, where does he say? They will be skills you'll only be able to develop through practice. He means like this muscle that you have to exercise the muscle. Which is a good way of seeing it, That means anyone can be creative. As long as they exercise that muscle, they will be creative and they will be awesome. You're awesome even without being so creative, too. I mean, everybody is awesome. Okay. Try some creative exercises. On top of reading and writing, you can try out some exercises to get those mental gears turning. Prompts, character interviews, contests, people watching can help buff your imagination. Just don't be creepy about the last one. Okay, so about these exercises and stuff, I find that it's easy if you are able to do it with other people. For me, at least, it's easier for me to feel motivated to do them if I'm able to do them with other people. Like, I get some other writer friends to do it with me, online friends. I find that when I try to do it on my own, I'm just not so motivated to do them. It's more like reading other people's answers, reading other people's, like if you have a writing prompt and you read what someone else has done with it, you're like, oh, they did that. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe I can try this. And you can kind of, I don't know, bounce off each other, I guess, influence each other. So I find personally that it helps me feel more motivated to do these types of exercises, these writing exercises, with other people. So anyway, I don't know about you. People watching, I don't know, depends on what kind of people you're watching. I do a lot of people watching. Naturally, I just tend to watch people do things, but it doesn't really buff up my imagination particularly. Yeah, anyway. Maybe if you go to an interesting place, like an amusement park or something, then you'd find a bunch of interesting people. World building. Even in low fantasy, which is where you take our world and make it a little more magical, you're going to be doing a lot of world building. World building is more than just thinking about the landscape of your world. It includes culture, religion, politics, languages, conflicts, traditions, animals, plants, and even magic systems. If you want to become a world building expert, check out these tips. Okay, understand world building fundamentals. There's even more that goes into world building than the list above. Luckily for us writers, my pal Abby wrote an awesome world building guide specifically for fantasy worlds. So I'm just actually going to open this up here. So the article is titled How to Create a Fantasy World Without Getting Lost in There. Let's take a little bit. See, I told you they use the exact same photo. This is the exact same photo. Something she talks about inspiration, start with the story, build the physical world, terrain, map, climate, flora, fauna, natural sources, cosmology, magic system, dig into the cultural setting, all that stuff. Tighten the threads between setting and narrative. Okay. Explore the world through characters' eyes. And for some reason, after step 5, there's step 0. Have fun. And they talk about their program. This might be an interesting article to look at another time. I mean, I can't react anymore to this because it just goes to that article. There's nothing there. Beware world builder's disease. I thought this should be called like world builder syndrome or something, not world builder's disease. Though it's not officially recognized in the DSM, world builder's disease is something all fantasy writers are susceptible to. It's when you get so caught up in creating a really cool world and forget what you're here to do. Right, keep that in mind when world building and only create what you need to start your story. The rest can come later. Only create what you need to start your story. I'm very interested in planners who like do the world building before they do all the world building before they do the writing. Like when do you know that you're ready to start writing the story? Like how do you stop yourself? Because for me, I'm a pantser, so I don't really get into this world builder's disease thing. I don't really get stuck in the world building because I'm figuring out the world and creating it as I write. So yeah, this doesn't really apply to me. But these sort of phrases is what I have issues with. Like, keep that in mind. When we only create what you need to start your story. It's like, it's pretty obvious that Doug Landsborough is probably a planner. And I think it becomes clear later on. Um, only create if you're a planner like me, somebody who plans the story before writing it and has an outline. Only create what you need to start your story. That is what has helped me. Something like that might have been a little bit better here, because I know that I'm a pantser, but not everyone who is a pantser actually knows that they are a pantser. And some people don't even know what a pantser is. It's writing by the seat of your pants pretty much without anything from the start, without anything, just some vague idea and you just go. So, yeah, I don't get world builder's disease, syndrome, whatever. So I can't really say much with that, but maybe you could have made it a little more clear that this is about planners. Research, aka read more. I'm copying out again, but with a caveat this time. As you're reading for inspiration and pleasure, note how the best world builders have created their fantasy settings, what works, what doesn't. Yeah, so this is reading. Through reading, yeah, you can get inspired by, okay, so this kind of stuff in the world is missing in this book. In this book's lore, this stuff is missing. So I need to, and it doesn't make sense. Because it's missing, there's things that don't make sense. So when I make my world, then I need to make sure to tie up these sort of loose ends. And so reading this book helped me realize what I need to do for my world. See what I mean? So I think that's what he's talking about here. He's talking about with research. Believable characters. Believable and fantasy seem to be contrary to one another, but when you're creating characters for your fantasy story, that's not actually the case. Don't get me wrong, believable characters don't need to be folks plopped from our world into a fantasy setting. Sure, your protagonist might literally be that, but not all of your characters will be. Rather, your reader needs to understand the motivation behind your character, and your imaginary people need to make realistic decisions. Here are some things to keep in mind. Begin with goals. What does your character want? Are they avenging the massacre of their village? Did they grow up in the slums? Is there a power brewing inside of them they're struggling to understand? If they don't have a clear goal and equally understandable motivation, they won't be believable. That is true. And character motivation is actually something that I have a lot of trouble with sometimes with some characters. Some characters, it's very clear what their motivation is. In some characters, it's very unclear, or their motivation changes over time. And I don't really know what to do with that, honestly. How do you like, because I have to justify why the motivation changed, right? How? I don't know. I don't know anything. So, yeah, begin with goals is good, but what if the goals change? What do you do with that? I don't know. So, I have nothing else to add here other than that I actually have a question, like, what do I do if the character's goals changed over time and their motivation changed over time? Like, what do you do with that? Strengths and flaws. I don't know how many times I've typed perfect characters are boring. In Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves, we're introduced to a name I can't read. A perfect paladin. He's strong, handsome, kicks some serious butt, is kind, and does things for the sake of being good, but he's also good to a fault, resulting in some intentionally cringe-worthy moments and making it almost impossible to have a real conversation with him. That balance stops him from being boring. I don't think... Okay, being boring is... Okay, wait. Let me rephrase my thoughts and think and do the stuff. Okay, I don't think having strengths and flaws is... Yes, it makes the character more interesting, but I don't think that is the reason you have strengths and flaws. I think the reason you have strengths and flaws is to show the character arc, and he does talk about arc in the next thing, but making a complex character, the reason I make a complex character isn't just to make him not boring. There are other reasons, right? There are other reasons. It's to show the character arc, show how the character has developed, show them going through struggles, making them relatable or believable. It's not about making them not boring. I think that's a weird reason to say, like, this is, you just don't want to make boring characters, so you give them strengths and flaws. That's not a good reason. That's not a good, it doesn't match. It just doesn't match. This doesn't go together. It doesn't make sense. I don't know why he said that. I think just making complex characters makes them more believable, makes them more relatable, helps to show the development of their character. You know, the character development helps to show their arc. Makes them real. I mean, I already said that. Makes them believable. And yeah, that makes them not boring, but that's not... I don't know what to say, but you know what I mean? You know what I mean? You know what I mean. Give them an arc. Any character who has major, quote, screen time in your book should have an arc. This is the internal journey they go through during their quest. Bilbo Baggins, for example, goes from a hobbit who doesn't want to leave home to a daring adventurer and, dare I say it, hero. It's only through his journey and the small challenges that lead to growth that his change is realistic and believable. When I first went over this article, I had an issue with this Bilbo Baggins example because I don't think it's a very good example to show in a character arc. Because so I've never read the book, so I don't know what it looks like in the books. Maybe it's very clear in the books. Talking about an arc of doesn't want to leave home to a daring adventure, is that a good arc to talk about? I mean, if you want to talk about an arc, maybe who has a good character arc? Who has a good character arc? I mean, like, for example, imagine a character who is selfish, learning to recognize other people's feelings and becoming a little bit more empathetic. That might be a good arc to talk about. Like, I often say writing advice articles need to give examples. I don't mean they need to give actual fiction, like published fiction examples. They can, like, make up an example that they use throughout the article. Even that is really helpful. An arc. Oh, I don't want to leave home and then I become an adventurer. Is that an arc? Seems like a weird example to use to me. What do you think? And so they give a bunch of other links that you can go to. Are these their own? Dabble, toiling, trouble. Yeah, these are all their own articles. So I don't know if I'd go over these, but who knows if I will or not. Story conflict. Last essential element of writing great fantasy is the story's primary conflict. Conflict comes in two forms, internal and external. Your primary external conflict will be the big fight or obstacle getting in the way of your protagonist's goal. It could be an invading army of goblins sweeping through the country, a tyrant ruling with the aid of an ancient relic, or a rival warrior vying for a spot in court. The external conflict is the sexy selling point of your novel. It's going to be what draws people in so you can sink your world building and well-developed character hooks into them. So here are a few tips to help you create a great story conflict. Make it relevant. Yeah, it's cool to pit your heroes up against a powerful wizard, but what's the point? Your characters should be tied into the primary conflict in a way that forces them to push forward. Avoiding the conflict should feel impossible or have consequences direr than enduring it. How does that have anything to do with make it relevant, or am I just confused? They should be tied to the primary conflict in ways that forces them to push forward. So like what? How will they be tied to the primary conflict in a way that forces them to push forward? What would that look like? Like, give me an example of what that would look like. So they mentioned some stuff. Oops, sorry about that. They mentioned some stuff. Rival warrior vying for a spot in court. So like, so if the main character is a warrior vying for a spot in court, the primary conflict would be him having a rival that is challenging him to such an extent that is forcing them to overcome their own flaws or whatever and forcing them to push forward. Is that an example? Is that a good example? I don't know. Avoiding the conflict, meaning avoiding fighting with the rival warrior, should feel impossible. Like maybe he is, like the main character has just become a knight, a new knight, and the person he's up against is a seasoned veteran. So it feels impossible to go up against. So he's a noob and he's going against a very experienced person. And the consequences are direr than enduring it. Like, what would the consequences be of him not going up against this guy? Maybe he needs the money to get treatment to help his grandmother get better or his mother get better or something like that. Maybe it's a deadly disease, and if he gets a place in court, he will be able to have access to the royal medicine potion stuff in order to save his family from a sickness that they have been suffering for 10 years. How about that? And so the consequences of him not doing the thing are dire because his family might die. And so he needs to endure this almost impossible task of facing this veteran warrior in order to get a place in court. Is that a good example? I tried so hard. Continually up the stakes. Right from the inciting instant, your conflict should continually ramp up. Every time the hero succeeds, something should set them back or threaten the progress. It's back and forth, not only adds tension, but makes your character's progress more believable. Yeah, so the worry example, maybe he gets sabotaged. He gets sabotaged or something, or maybe he is somehow threatened in some other way. Maybe he is accused of cheating at one point. Something like that. So he goes one step forward, 2 steps back as he's fighting this veteran guy for this royal spot. Yeah, maybe. Think that's a good example. See, that's how you can continuously use the same example. And it's not even a real example, but you did give an example in the beginning, so you can continuously use that through here. So it makes it easier to understand what the heck you're talking about. And I'm giving you an example of how you can do that, okay? Integrate and subvert tropes. Tropes can sometimes have a bad reputation. People often mistake tropes for cliches, but that's not really the case. Unlike their overdone cousins, tropes are more like ideas and commonalities readers want in a book. That's a good way of phrasing it. Ideas and commonalities readers want in a book. We want these tropes. As you're reading other fantasy works, note which recurring tropes in their conflicts, betrayals, hero doubting themselves, empathetic villains, etc., make it more exciting. How can you use those tropes in your work? So like with the worry example, a betrayal might be his friend actually helps the veteran frame him for cheating or frame him for a murder of some important person in court, maybe, to sabotage him. Or the hero, he doubts himself. I mean, he's a newbie going against experienced guys, so he's like, I don't know if I can do this, blah, 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 blah. Or empathetic villains, I don't know how that would come into play. Who knows? So something like that. I think I did pretty good, don't you think? For the example, something that you could have done, Doug Landsborough. Coffee break. Okay. Creating the setting. People read fantasy because they want to get lost in an imaginary world. Oh my gosh, I go... Okay, there you are. Even if it's a version of our own. Most authors write fantasy because they want to bring those very worlds to life. It's a pretty good relationship we've got going on here, but since the setting is so important to your fantasy story, here are some helpful pieces of advice to immerse your readers. Describing the environment. We are going to describe the environment. So before we get into that, okay, people read fantasy because they want to get lost. Yes, we do, even if it's a version of our own. Yes, that's true. Most authors write fantasy because they want to bring those very words to life. I am not speaking. I write fantasy because I want to escape into the world myself. Sorry, I'm so selfish. But yeah, I do want you to see the worlds that I'm seeing and take you there. Actually, I want to force you in there. Shove you into my fantasy world, say, go, enjoy it. There's your chance to escape. Escapism. Yeah, the setting is pretty important to your fantasy story. If you don't got a good setting, either it's not believable, it falls flat, or it's just like, I don't know what's going on here. Like, it's so confusing. Like, I've read books like that where it was just like, huh? What? I mean, you mentioned this thing and it seems very important, but you're never going to talk about it again. So why did you even mention it? It seems so important. Anyway. Describing the environment. Finally, we're back to describing the environment. The most obvious way to craft an incredible blah, 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 blah. I cannot read. Hold on. The most obvious way to craft an incredible world is to describe the world itself. Okay, Abby's Great Fantasy World Building Guide. Here it is again, just in case. That is good. That is nice to put it down here again, because when you read that, I'm like, oh yeah, you linked it somewhere up there. I don't feel like going to look for it, so it's good that you linked it here again. That is very nice. Let's talk about 3 different ways. Okay. Here we go with the silly old show don't tell. This is the advice for all of your writing, but it really matters when describing your setting. It's easy to draw 3 or 4 paragraphs describing the flora, fauna, stars, and geography of your setting, but that isn't going to engage your reader. Show them the animals, the bioluminescent fungi reacting to the presence of your hero, and the glow of the 3 moons illuminating their path. So he gives some worksheets on this Dabble website. There was so much about show don't tell that is problematic. People don't really know what it is. I don't know if Dabble guy Doug Landsborough actually knows what it is. We'll see. Maybe I'll check out their worksheet, or maybe not. Showed him the animals, the bioluminescent fungi reacting. I don't know, you know. Is this an example of show don't tell? You're telling us to show the fungi reacting to the presence of your hero. Maybe you could actually go into a little deeper. Actually do this. Actually show, don't tell. As an example. Would have been very nice to do that. They never do they? Make a map. Okay. Even if you're like me, completely devoid of artistic talent, it can help to draw a map. This doesn't have to be a map that goes at the front of your book. It never has to be seen by anyone other than yourself, but plotting out, you will see he is a plotter, he's a planner. Adds detail about the environment. This visualization will make sure you have a good variety of physical details in your world. Okay, as a pantser, I do not do maps. Maybe some pantsers do maps in the beginning, but I don't do maps until I'm working on the second draft. So, you know, if you want to draw a map, draw a map. I don't have anything against drawing maps. I just don't personally do it in the beginning or anything. Tie it into your story. In real life, our societies and civilizations has all been tied into our geography. Towns and villages are settled on rivers. Nomadic peoples follow animals and natural resources. Agricultural products vary based on where you can plant your crops. Beyond just thinking about how pretty or scary your world is, consider how the environment impacts other elements of your story. Yeah, that is a good thing to think about. I don't always think about this. Probably should. I don't have anything to say about this. I mean, these were good actual examples. I mean, they weren't like actual like fantasy examples, but you know, they are good examples to show you what you can think about for your fantasy world. This is what you should be doing for all this stuff, but okay, we're finally down here to developing the culture. This is what the place I began with over here. Your fantasy setting is more than the physical environment. The culture of the people within your setting, while influenced by the geography, plays just as important a role in your world. It's best to give the cultures of your world some thought before you start writing so you can work these cultures into your fantasy epic. Culture has deep roots. Beyond the influences of your world's geography, cultures are shaped by their history. It's up to you, as an author writing a fantasy novel, to understand the impact your world's history has had on the people and civilizations in your setting. You don't need to write textbooks worth of history and then they talk about their program. Okay, culture has deep roots. You could have given a little bit more example of what you mean by how these cultures have deep roots. Actually give some examples like you did before. You did very good with the examples. You can do them more here. Variety is key. Remember our map. Different cultures sprung up and evolved across your world. Differences create obstacles, add room for growth, can complement each other and make your world feel more alive. Consider variances in language, religion, tradition, military, uses for magic, intercultural relations, etc. These are the kind of examples, I mean, they're not like actual like fantasy story examples, but these are the kind of things I want you to do for everything here. Okay, and we went over the don't be harmful thing in the beginning. I don't have to go over that again. Where are these writing advice articles and their lack of examples? I mean, come on. Is it so difficult? Establishing rules. Lastly, make your setting as concrete rules and limitations. For some settings, your rules will set it apart from other stories more than any other features. Establish your magic system. Most fantasy stories will have magic in them. I think we can agree on that. If you're going to include magic in your world, you need to understand how that magic works. That means building a full-fledged magic system. I don't think you have to build a full-fledged magic system. None of my magic systems that I have are full-fledged. I am hungry. If you're going to include magic in your world, I do think you need to understand how that magic works to an extent. Like some of the basic rules, what are the limitations, what is forbidden, if magic is like people in high society can use this magic, but people in the lower part of society cannot use this magic. Is there something like that? Is there a cost for magic? Just some basic things about magic. They seem to have an article. I don't know if they talk about those things in their article. But you don't have to make a full-fledged magic system. You don't have to go into all the details of the magic system if you don't want to, because I never do. And no one has ever questioned my magic system, so I guess that's a good sign. You don't have to do everything at once if you don't want to. You can if you want to, if you like it, but you don't have to. Natural limits. Hey, look, we're back to the physical geography again. What rules does the environment put on your world? Does winter cut off travel between countries? Is a storm of shadows dividing the continent? I am pretty sure they are talking about the Grishaverse. Do creatures in that forest over there make it forbidden unless you're sending kids in there, I guess? I don't know what book he's referring to, but he's definitely referring to a specific book. I don't know which one. It's winter. Is this about the Game of Thrones? Anyway, yeah, natural limits. Interesting to think about. I mean, he asks a bunch of, do creatures in that forest make it forbidden? This should be a question mark. I just realized this should be a question mark, not a period. So he just asks questions. He's not saying you have to think about the natural limits. He's just asking questions, so it implies that you can think about the natural elements. So it's good that he says you don't have to do this, because you don't. Societal limits. If there's anything people, even fantasy people, love doing, what? If there's anything people, even fantasy people, love doing, it's telling each other what we can and can't do. Think about how the rules of your world's societies affect your characters. Does religion maliciously enforce gender roles? Is magic restricted to the ruling class? Is murder legal? Yeah, so these are just, he should have put etc. after this. That would have been a nice little addition. So yeah, thinking about the societal limits, I do agree that it's good to think about this. As I said, with the magic system, that maybe people in the highest society are permitted to use this magic, but people in the low society are only allowed to use a specific part of that magic or something like that. You know, there could be something like that. Or maybe religion, like people in this religion use this magic, but people who aren't in this religion aren't allowed to use this magic. There could be something like that too. So it is good to, think about societal limits, or people living in different regions. Do they have districts and stuff like that? How does the legal system work if you want to think about that? If somebody is walking around with a gun, is that legal to do? If somebody is walking around with a sword, is that legal to do? What are the types of crimes that people can be caught for and tried for and stuff like that? You can think about that. You can think about that if you want to. You don't have to think about that, but maybe it will help flesh out your world if you think about that. That's what I think. So anyway, that was what? Establishing the rules, yes. Okay, this is actually the outro because the rest is just about crafting the story, which I don't think is something that is particular to fantasy. So this is an article on the advice for writing a fantasy, what was it called? Tips and tricks from writing a fantasy novel. So crafting the story isn't something that is specific for fantasy. It can be applied to any type of crafting the story, because he talks about plotting the story. Listen. If you're a plotter, go ahead, plot the story. If you like to do that beforehand, understand things beforehand, that's you. That's what you like to do. It works for you. Great. do that. But if you don't want to do that, you're like me, you're a pantser, you just want to sit down and write the story, do it. Enjoy yourself. Go on billions of tangents and come back in the second draft to clean up all those plot holes. Do it like you do it like me. It still works. It's still fine. It's still fine to be a pantser, okay? I wish he would make it clear that there are other ways to craft a story. It's not just plotting. I wish he would talk about that. But it doesn't seem like he does. He talks about plotting the story. He talks about developing the characters, writing the narrative, and that's it. That's it. And then we just get into Dabble, their writing program. Which, I mean, I did sort of check out, the features and stuff. It does seem to be pretty good. I mean, it might be kind of useful. I don't know if I would trust it with myself. I mean, it won't work for me. It won't work for me because I'm a pantser. I don't know how I would use it as a pantser. Maybe there's a way to use it as a pantser. But anyway, that was this article. So as you can see, as you would be able to tell, that it's actually a pretty good article. I would give it a solid 3. Not a 4. I haven't found an article that's a 4. 3.5 maybe. I'll be a little bit nice. There are some things that you could do to improve this article. Just because an article was written once doesn't mean it can never be edited, okay? You can always come back and edit it. Yeah, so that was Tips and Tricks for Writing a Fantasy Novel by Doug Landsborough, April 20, 2023. What did you think about this article? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and also about the Don't Be Harmful section. Be nice to each other and be respectful to each other when you comment about this topic. It's kind of a sticky situation type of, I don't know what, maybe it's subjective, maybe it's not. I have no idea. It's a little bit difficult to deal with. Yeah, so anyway, that's it for this video. I did try to beast through it. It's pretty long. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it, and subscribe. And if you haven't subscribed yet, share this video with your friends, because it's actually not such a bad article. You can share it with your friends and like the video. Click the like button if you liked it. Yeah, as I've said in previous videos, leave a comment. And if you don't know what to comment, just tell me what your favorite book is right now. Your current favorite book, like the book that you recommend to anybody. Tell me what it is right now. Your current one, your current highest recommendation book right now. Mine would be, oh boy, but it's been this one for quite some time, but The Stormkeeper's Island by Catherine Doyle. It's a middle grade fantasy, but it is a fantastical trilogy. Highly recommend. I also do really recommend adult fantasy, Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. So those are the two for me. Different middle grade fantasy and adult fantasy, just for some variety. You can recommend 2 books or 3 books or 5 books or whatever you want, but just your current top recommendations right now, if you don't know what else to comment. So that is the end of this video. I hope you have a lovely day and keep hydrated. What else do I say? Keep hydrated. I'll leave links to articles and stuff like that in the description as always. And what else do I say? I don't say anything else. That's it. And you will hear me in the next video. The fox is out.